Warning: this show may cause you to play more. The consequences of this can include enjoying work, looking forward to coming home, dealing effectively with challenges, and being happy. Welcome to PlayDHD, the premier resource for expert information, conversation, and content focused on play and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. With psychologist and ADHD coach, Dr. Kirsten Milliken. Welcome to PlayDHD.
Hi, it's Kirsten Milliken with PlayDHD, and we are here today with Melissa Orlov. Melissa was kind enough to come on the show today. She and I actually met for the first time at the CHAD conference in Washington this year, where I got to listen to her talk about her book that she's already written and the upcoming book that we're actually going to be talking about a little bit. And our interview didn't work so well, so she has come on, and we're going to do it even better this time. So we'll have less distractions with the conference going on around us. This will be airing in February, so of course this is the month of Valentine's Day, and we wanted to bring you Melissa Orlov because she is somebody who is one of the top experts in ADHD and the effects that has on relationships. In fact, her book is The ADHD Effect on Marriage, which I can't tell you how many times I've given out to clients and friends and all of that, because it is one of the best books if you're looking to see how ADHD impacts a relationship. So Melissa has been writing and speaking about the topic since 2007, and she started her research in 2005, and I suspect even before that, because one of the things that Melissa will tell her audience is that part of this has to do not just with her research, but also with living in a marriage with ADHD. So, obviously there was journal research as well as personal research, I'm sure, going on. She's also been working with Dr. Hallowell since 2004, and she teaches couples, therapists, counselors, and coaches about how ADHD impacts relationships. She also blogs for Psychology Today and has a Your Relationship column, which is in the Attitude magazine. And she consults privately with couples and individuals. Now, and I understand that your next class, Melissa, is coming up January 28th, right, for couples? Is that right?
It is.
So
By the time people see this in February, they'll have to wait till April.
Okay, well, there you go. So if you've missed the January one, and maybe we'll try and get that up maybe a day or two before February starts so people can hear this. And she also has the blog ADHD in Marriage, which is terrific. I get an email, I think, every week or every other week that has a nice little kind of quote there and maybe a little comment from Melissa, as well as just some tips about how to manage ADHD, just some quick little things. It's not a big, long blog, which I really appreciate. So Melissa, as I said, wrote the book ADHD Effects on Marriage, and what's the name of your upcoming book?
The upcoming book is called The Couple's Guide to Thriving with ADHD. So it's the follow-on to the first one. The first one talked about how to identify ADHD in a relationship, what the patterns look like, and then gave 6 specific steps that couples need to go through to help change their relationship. This next one is about the sort of hot spots, the emotional hurdles that couples run into as they're working to change their relationship. So it's organized by hot spots like, my partner doesn't attend to me well enough, or I feel ignored, those kinds of emotional things that you face. And then it talks about how to work through this so that you can thrive together as a couple.
Oh my God. Well, I can't tell you. I mean, I wish that I had a lineup of all of my friends and clients behind me who have read your book, either in total or in parts, and have used the information that's been in that book to help them. So when you were at the CHAD conference, I know we were talking a little bit about how play takes a role in sometimes not only some of the problems that can happen in relationships with ADHD, but also in some of the solutions that can happen. Right. Can you talk a little bit about how maybe the playfulness of somebody with ADHD might interfere with a relationship?
Well, yeah, so I don't know if playfulness or sort of going with the flow maybe is one way to think about it. And so often there's a conflict between if you have a non-ADHD and an ADHD partnership, which is a very common combination. You'll have the non-ADHD person who's used to setting an endpoint, following a specific path, planning ahead, and you'll have an ADHD person who's actually used to sort of the opposite, which is taking things as they come at them, responding in the present moment versus doing a lot of forward thinking. And so those can create conflicts. That kind of a sort of playful attitude, if you want to think of it that way, or sort of looser, less structured attitude, isn't inherently bad in any way, shape, or form, but it's a quite different way of approaching things from the non-ADD approach.
Now, I know one of the things that you talked about was the fact that, you know, sometimes when you've got ADHD, it's a great way to start a relationship because you really feed off of that novelty and the newness and the romance of a new relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and not only that, but the chemistry of infatuation means that you get a lot of extra dopamine. This isn't just people who have ADHD. This is everybody. Helen Fisher wrote a great book on this called Why We Love, or I think that's what it's called. Anyway, it's about the chemistry of love, and this is one of the things she talks about. So people who have ADD are filled with dopamine when they're infatuated, and they're extremely attentive as well as very energetic, a ton of fun to be with. I mean, it is really wonderful, actually, to date somebody who has ADHD. It's so much fun. And of course, because you're so different, you complement each other, right? So the person who doesn't have ADD brings a little bit more organization, maybe a little more caution, and that's kind of a breath of fresh air as well. And so everybody is pretty excited, typically, in those sort of hyper-focused courtships. That's why we call it hyper-focused courtship. You're really focused on your partner. And that feels wonderful.
So relationship goes on for a while, and some of, you know, couples get into routines, they get into habits, and they get somewhat used to each other, right? There's not as much to find out that's new, maybe. So some of the shininess wears off, the honeymoon phase, the dating honeymoon phase wears off. And what can happen then in the relationship at that point? Is that different for people with ADHD versus a neurotypical person?
Yes, and so what happens actually for everybody, again, this isn't just the people with the ADHD, but also their partners who don't have ADHD, is that after somewhere around the 24-month, somewhere between 20 and 24 months, that dopamine settles back down to normal. So for a person who has ADHD, normal is actually low levels of dopamine typically. And so then the distractibility and all that comes back. Now, what happens is that this is a shock typically to the relationship because that person who has ADD at low dopamine levels hasn't been in the relationship before. So the infatuation process, the courtship process raised up those dopamine levels. So this is sort of a new person in the relationship. So if you know about it ahead of time, then there are things you can do where you spend extra time attending to each other, add new wonderful things to do together, play together, that can keep the interest and the excitement as you get to know each other again in this sort of new lower dopamine state.
So what happens though? I mean, if you know, I know I have ADHD. I know at about 18 to 20 months, things start. You know, I start getting more interested in work and less interested in making a plan when I come home at night. So if I know that, obviously I can plan ahead, and I can tell my partner before we're anywhere close to that. But there are many adults with ADHD who don't realize it, and I know a lot of my clients are people who are in their marriage, their spouse has said, there's really something wrong. We've been together a couple of years, and this is not who you were when we started. And the adult then goes, and because, you know, it's a bigger issue, gets diagnosed. So they had no forewarning, no planning.
Right.
What do you do when you're in the middle of it?
Well, so, I mean, one of the things you do is you learn as much as you can about it so that you can really understand what's going on. I mean, one of the most harmful things for relationships impacted by ADHD is not being well enough educated about what the ADHD impacts are. So there are specific patterns that develop specifically in relationship to the characteristics of ADHD, like distractibility and things that you need to know about so you interpret them properly and can remain warm towards each other rather than resentful. So if your partner is distracted from you in a low dopamine state, you might interpret, if you didn't know what the ADD was there or weren't thinking about it, you might interpret that distraction as that your partner doesn't care about you or love you, when in fact that might be very far from the truth. It's just that the person is distracted. So being well educated about ADHD and how it shows up in a relationship is a huge and very important tool for couples to learn how to thrive together with it. I mean, literally, after this relationship, after you end up with the infatuation moving into something else and the more normal thing, essentially you have to create routines that will accommodate the ADD symptoms in the relationship in a way that both people feel very comfortable with and aren't, like they're not giving up who they are. A relationship is about it's about how you respond to each other. So how you respond to those symptoms it is very much your own responsibility as a non-ADHD partner. And there are lots and lots of different choices. Again, I'll move back to the distractibility example because everybody who has ADD essentially has some form of distractibility.
Huh?
So distraction is there. You can respond to that a whole bunch of different ways. You can become resentful. You can feel hurt because you think your partner doesn't care about you. Or another possible response is that you are you notice that the distraction is there, and you and your partner have talked about it as an ADHD symptom, and you can gently go up to your partner and say, gee, you seem particularly distracted right now, and I'm feeling a little bit lonely. Can we go out on a date together or something? I mean, and that's so much more positive than sitting around going, oh, my partner doesn't care about me, or becoming anxious about it, or misinterpreting it, or you can say, look, we know distractibility is part of this relationship, so let's make sure every Saturday afternoon we go out and do something fun together so we can connect and enjoy ourselves and really remember why we're together as a couple. So there are very positive ways to respond and very negative ways to respond. It's not just about the ADHD.
How do you figure out what the best strategy is going to be?
So there are a couple of very basic must-haves, and probably the most important must-have is a certain amount of what I call attend time. Attend time isn't just being together, but it's actually being together and focused on each other, so that you can communicate that you care. And so you have to look at your relationship and just make sure you've scheduled enough attend time in any given week, so that you feel you continue to remain connected. And if you've gotten disconnected, all the more important reason to schedule that attend time so you can reconnect. And you and I can talk a little bit later about the role that play has in that. I know you'll love that.
Well, let's talk now about it. See, that's another thing. Frustration tolerance when you have ADHD. You know that, right? I want to know now.
You want to stay very connected, and obviously part of a courtship is all of the interesting, fun, new things. Getting to know each other is new. There's always something to learn about each other and to be with each other. So it turns out that it correlates with research that Arthur Aaron has been doing up at Stony Brook about the kinds of things that connect couples. And one of those is clearly doing things that would be considered playful. Things that are new and challenging together, and that as he looks at it, it's not just spending time together. That doesn't particularly impact connection. It doesn't hurt connection, but actually engaging in new and interesting challenges. So I always tell people, go off and take ballroom dancing lessons if you've never done it, or learn to tango, or go learn how to do geocaching for the first time, or whatever. I mean, it's just something that's totally different that you have to learn together. And I think another thing that it does, and he doesn't talk about this specifically in his research, but I think it levels the playing field a little bit. So a lot of ADHD, non-ADHD couples move into sort of a parent-child dynamic as they progress, which is not a healthy dynamic. And so when you go off and you do new and interesting things, or you travel to a completely new place, that has a greater likelihood of sort of leveling out. Somebody isn't necessarily in charge the way they might be around the household or in your regular everyday lives.
Sometimes going out is not an option. How to keep things kind of going at home and engage each other when you're working with ADHD in the relationship?
Well, so there are a couple things. It just happens I was writing yesterday for my blog about bedtimes, which are an area of conflict for people often because lots of times the ADHD partner is a sort of a late-to-bed night owl type, and the non-ADHD partner is so exhausted from all the stuff that they're doing that they're a very early-to-bed person, and so there's a lot of conflict around that. One place that you can play, and I don't mean this sexually, but often there's an hour perhaps at the end of the night. People are kind of tired, so it's not a goof around necessarily for a lot of people. But there is an opportunity to be kind of lighthearted with each other, and particularly when you're working on your relationship or your relationship is struggling, it can be hard to remember that you don't have to solve every problem all the time. That in fact part of what your relationship needs is just a dose of sort of gently enjoying being together. So whether that's doing a puzzle together or reading together in bed, sort of touching each other, whether you're cuddling. I tell couples sometimes spend 10 minutes of non-sexual time cuddling, either at the end of the day or the beginning of the day, just to say nice things to each other, or to show your gratitude, those kinds of things. All the positive things. I mean, you have to really, if you're struggling, you have to sometimes really think about this with great intentionality. But the results of doing it, doing so, are fabulous. I mean, it's really a positive thing, not to just always be working really hard on everything.
Yeah. You had a post recently where you were quoting. I think it was a conversation you had with your cousin. And your cousin or whoever it was said, I'm reinventing myself in my relationship. I want to be better. I don't remember the whole thing, and your question was, so are you sharing this new self with your partner? And the other person said no.
Yeah.
So when you're
working on myself right now, I'm like, well, really, why not share? I mean, again, you don't have to. It doesn't have to be a big thing, but people become very wary of sharing, sharing warmth when they've been struggling, and it really is like cutting off your nose to spite your face. You say, okay, well, I can't do that. I don't want to share the warmth. I don't want to reach out. I don't want to say thank you to my partner for a little something they did. Whatever it is that you're sort of holding back on, or in his case, sharing his pleasure at learning about himself fresh and rethinking about, this is really who I am, and even just to share it by acting in a way that was more positive because he was finding out positive things about himself can help the relationship. So you really want to be careful not to be like the Grinch in your relationship. You really want to be able, you have to lead by example. If you want your relationship to be full of playfulness or full of warmth, you need to offer that into the relationship yourself in order to be able to help create that environment. It doesn't guarantee your partner will do it back, but at least you're living consistently with what you're trying to achieve.
Now, I don't remember if it was Harville Hendricks, but there's a couples therapist who talks about just the act of holding hands. Even if you're feeling angry towards your partner, just that act can kind of change the dynamic between the two of you, and I think that relates to some of just having some warmth sometimes. It doesn't always have to be this serious stuff, even if you're struggling in the relationship.
Well, and that particular thing also is, touch can be very therapeutic in lots of ways, but also there's a risk, right? When you go, if you're struggling, and you go to hold somebody's hand, you're saying to them that you care enough to reach out to them and try to create that bridge. And that's an important thing to communicate. Holding hands is great. And actually, when you have ADD, one of the good things that is lovely is to go for a walk, because the physical act of walking actually gives you some outlet and helps focus you. So Just taking a walk together, maybe holding hands, talking together can be very, very good. There are fewer distractions, and the brain is more focused, and it's a good time to.
Being someplace green, right? They're saying turns our brains on. So
green is good, and walking is the act of walking, the physicality of the walk helps focus the mind.
So Melissa Orlov, tell me again the name of your new book.
The Couple's Guide to Thriving with ADHD, and it's I wrote it with a co-author this time, actually, Nancy Kohlenberger, who is a licensed marriage and family therapist out from California, who is very familiar with my work and is also works as a marriage consultant, actually. So there are two of us this time.
Wonderful. And so tell me what are people going to see when they look in the book?
Well, so the book is organized by hotspot. It's a problem solution book, and actually the genesis of the book is this couples seminar that I give. Part of the couples seminar is I ask people to not only ask questions live, but also to send me their written questions so that I can answer them in length and then send all the written answers back out. So most of the questions that are in this book come from these seminars, which over the years you see a similarity of problem areas that people are still struggling with as they're trying to work on their relationship. So that's sort of where the book came out of.
So can you give me an example of what some of the hot spots are that you talk about?
Where's my book manuscript?
Something when you've been doing something for so long, right? You get kind of down in the middle of it.
One of them is too many fights, and another is parent-child dynamics. Another area is feeling lonely or not having enough attention in your relationship. There are a couple of them on your intimate and sexual life. A lot of the couples that I've worked with have great difficulties with that. No big surprise if you're struggling with anger or frustration, your sex life tends to go away pretty fast. So
that's a topic that a lot of people are not happy to talk about.
Yeah.
Because it's one thing to say that ADHD affects your relationship just in general, but sex is an important part of a relationship for a lot of people, and when you have ADHD, sometimes it's even more important, and can be a way to both have things fall apart as well as maybe improve. Can you just give us a little bit about some of the areas that you address that have to do with sexual relationship when you have ADHD?
Yeah, and so there's a fairly broad, whereas everybody runs into the same issues with like distractibility. The sexual issues are a little bit broader. One of the reasons is that there is a sort of a group of people who don't want to have sex, and that may be related to the ADHD. There are another group of people who have ADHD who really, really, really want to have sex because they love the stimulation, and then there's sort of everybody in between. So there's a broader range, it seems, in terms of what's being contributed in the sexual area. But probably the thing that I run into the most is that the relationship is struggling so much that the sex life has really diminished or gotten very problematic. The kinds of things that can contribute to that are parent-child dynamics. It's very unsexy to have that in your relationship. You don't want to have sex with a parent figure or with a child figure, so that has to be gotten rid of. Anger is another big issue, a big barrier to a good sexual life, so working through anger, and there's a whole chapter on anger in this book, and the kinds of ways that it shows up and how to work with that. Then sometimes distractibility gets in the way, so there are some people with ADHD who are easily distracted during sex, and so therefore have difficulty completing it. And again, depending on how you diagnose it, and I work through some of that, sometimes it's as simple as taking a short-acting stimulant so you can stay more focused.
Not necessarily the little blue pill, though.
Yeah, and not at 10 o'clock at night, right?
Yeah,
you're awake long. So
that's a very real consideration, though. If you have ADHD and you're distractible, but you want to be attentive,
right,
you may have to think about when are you going to have sex so that you can use your stimulant medication to help.
Yeah, and also, back to that bedtime thing, again, if you think about people being night owls and early risers, though, as a combo, sometimes that means that when you're going to bed at night, one partner isn't really interested in sex, and when you're waking up in the morning, the other isn't interested in sex. And so for those couples, you have to find another time typically. So, the weekend afternoons being a good middle ground. But then you have to schedule, create the time to actually have a sexual relationship. It's really, really important that the sexual relationships get fixed up. Because, that you really start thinking about it not as something that, oh, well, I guess we're not going to have sex for a while, but as something that's a critical part of how you connect in your relationship. And then there are other things as well, like need for newness and stimulation. So
your local toy store can help with that.
I have some suggestions for that, some suggestions for some reading and different things that are, I didn't go very far out of the mainstream on this stuff.
This didn't turn into a porn book.
If they want to do that, they can do that on their own. But, so I give them some ideas for that. Just sort of making sure that you understand that there is a contract, a marital contract about how much, often unspoken, how much sex you will or will not have in the relationship. So when I hear somebody say, well, I just don't feel like it, I'm perfectly happy to have my partner have sex with my partner, but I'm just sort of not all that interested. My typical response is, well, have it anyway. And you'll get interested as you're having the sex.
It's kind of like going to the gym, right? You don't always want to go, but afterwards you feel good about doing it.
Yes, exactly. It's actually a fabulous parallel. I'll have to use that sometime.
There you go.
Exactly. Because if you have this expectation of, well, your partner should stay monogamous, but you don't have to have sex with them. There's a real inherent tension in that concept, and way too many people think that way.
Yeah.
You really have to think through some of these issues.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about in the bedroom and out of the bedroom that people really need to make plans to play, to have fun, to engage each other in the relationship, and to understand each other too, that the ADHD partner needs to understand the impact they have and vice versa.
Right.
And that ADHD is just part of what they're working with. So. Yeah,
it's hard. I think one of the issues for those who have ADHD who might be watching this, it's very hard because they've lived with ADHD all their lives to really understand the impact of the ADHD symptoms on a partner who hasn't dealt with this stuff before. And it's a critical understanding to be at least sympathetic to the responses that your partner is having to it, and the feelings of loss of control, for example, that a non-ADD partner suddenly, their lives aren't organized anymore the way they used to be, and there are all these surprises that they can't predict or suspect. And so to be aware of the fact that it's worth understanding what these challenges are, so that you can be empathetic and so that you can work around them. The ADD in no way, shape, or form dooms a relationship. But denying the importance of ADD can. And so you have to really learn about it.
No matter which side of the relationship you're on, whether you are the partner with ADHD or the non-ADHD partner, you really have to look at your part and also take into consideration the effect that you have on the other person. So you have to look at it both inside and outside of yourself.
Right. And I always am very careful. I was talking about the ADHD person there and the impact of the ADHD. But the impact of the responses to the ADHD, if you become a parent figure or you become a controlling figure or you become angry or short-tempered, those impacts are huge as well. And you have to not just say, oh, well, the ADHD or my partner forced me to it. No, those are choices that you make. It's not about, you have to be that way or don't have to be that way. There are a lot.
Personal responsibility.
Exactly, yes. It's always hard to look in that mirror. I can tell you I spent a lot of years not looking in that mirror. It took me a long time to figure it out myself. So.
Yeah, but you did, and you're sharing it with everybody, which is wonderful. So, and you do it so well.
The other thing that I have that I would point out to people, because actually it's a phenomenal and I think unique resource, is I give an 8-week seminar by teleconference, which has helped an awful lot of couples who are really in disastrous positions change their relationships for the better.
And now you have one starting, it'll be January 28th, which might be have already happened when this airs, but then you've got another one starting, you said, in April?
Probably in April. I try to give it 3 times a year, but since I give it at night, that is definitely creeps into my private life, which of course, since I make a big deal about making sure you have a private life, I have to balance out. But anyway, I try to give it 3 times a year. So typically it's a January, February, March, and then another one in April, May, and another one in the fall.
And you were saying, so there's the teleclass, which happens, but then you also encourage people to send in questions and that you respond to during this whole process.
Yeah, so as part of if you're in the teleclass, you definitely get all your questions answered. I just make sure that that's part of what happens. And I do try to answer questions that people send me. I get a lot of them, so I'm not always great at it, but I do try to do that because my goal really is just to help people move through this. I mean, the good news is that ADD is, in fact, quite manageable, and once you know what's going on in the relationship and you know what these patterns are, these relationships can be turned around. I mean, it's really wonderful, actually. My line of work is so great because it's so wonderful to see these couples who thought they were going to have to get divorced turn around their relationships and be really happy after that.
So I want to focus on that just as one of the last tidbits, because it's not just about turning around the relationship, but making it a really great relationship.
Yeah, and so, I mean, and this isn't overnight. This takes a lot of hard work, so I don't want people to think I'm trying to sell them snake oil or something like that. It's just, I'll give you the information and then you have to do the work. Over the course of, usually it's like a year or something like that, people get the stuff out of the way that needs to be gotten out of the way. They start to optimize their treatment for ADHD, which typically has not been happening up until that point. They start thinking about their interactions much more intentionally and creating, to your point, adding play, adding a way to talk about symptoms when they do show up, because one of the characteristics of ADHD obviously is it goes and comes, and it's sort of repetitive. And how do you keep yourself as a non-ADD partner from being discouraged by that, but rather just accepting that and saying, oh, hey, we need to, can you remember that you're getting kind of distracted right now? Let's make sure we go out and do something this weekend together and reconnect, and not have that be a negative, hurtful thing, but just sort of part of what your life is, and make it just be part of a strong relationship. And once you get to that level where you're friends again and whatever, then you can add back in the intimacy, the romance, the things that you treasure, right? I mean, so part of my husband's strengths are directly related to his ADHD, his ability to think outside the box, his desire to do things sort of spontaneously, are wonderful. And so I can start to treasure those things again once I'm not feeling angry about the fact that he wants to do something spontaneous, Yeah. So.
Well, and I have to say, too, I know a lot of my clients have found that once you have an explanation for something, whether it's ADHD or if it's something else you're dealing with, that you can almost kind of create this template, and you have a basis for starting to understand things, and you can actually take a relationship to a much higher level because you have that insight. And so, I mean...
Well, that's exactly right, and I tell people, both my husband and I would tell you, without any hesitation at all, our relationship is much stronger for the struggles that we've gone through. We have a much better understanding of how to talk to each other and who we are, and the fact that we can work anything out, essentially. We just have to stick with it a little bit sometimes. And that's a really great place to be. It's a very mature place to be, I guess, is the way to say it.
Mature. We're all aiming for that, aren't we?
I don't know. But anyway.
Not grown up, but mature.
I'm feeling mature these days. I don't know about you, but anyway, it's a good thing.
I'm feeling mature. I mean, in my house. Melissa Orlov, I want to thank you so much again for coming back on PlayDHD and talking to us about couples and ADHD and play.
Oh, well, you are welcome. I'm delighted to talk to you about it.
Thanks. So come back again, and we will be having another episode in a couple of weeks. And for now, this is Kirsten for PlayDHD. Bye.